In today's video, we are going to look at one of the most popular Muslims online and see how he tries to present a case that the Bible has contradictions. So you as a Christian watching this video know exactly how to engage. He begins this conversation in regards to contradictions in the Bible by speaking about extra books.
The Bible today has missing books from the original, you're saying?
Maybe that may work for someone who has no understanding of the Bible, but the books which he's referring to are not in hiding, are not extant, they're not out of print. They are readily available for anybody to read online. In fact, the Roman Catholics and even some Protestants actually read them and accept them as scripture still to this day. He went on next to go to something specifically in the Bible now, and he talked about the ending of St. Mark's Gospel account.
If you look at the discussion of the end of Mark, right, you find from 1721, I believe, that is not found in the old manuscripts, right?
If any book in history is more than likely kept to the best condition, the Bible is the book that ultimately holds the crown. So that argument he's actually making about the last 12 verses of Mark actually works in our favor and showcases the enormous amount of manuscripts we actually have to examine. And even on the flip side, there are actually quite some decent cases of people making a strong case that those last 12 verses actually are authentic. And I'll try to post resources below this video based on all of these different things we're going to talk about in today's video. Another thing he talks about in this conversation briefly as well is he talks about the book of Hebrews. He mentions how the book of Hebrews is written by an anonymous author, and therefore that means the Bible is corrupt or we can't trust the Bible.
So who wrote Hebrews, since you brought that up?
Now, that doesn't logically follow either, because let's say, for example, I sent you a letter, I gave you a letter, and the letter explained multiple different things about your life, and all of them were accurate. You didn't know who wrote the letter, but that wouldn't stop what's in the letter being true, would it? Another thing that the Muslim Shaykh Uthman Farooq went to next was, he now said, look, there's a contradiction in the Bible between Matthew's gospel account and the writing of the book of Acts. Because he asks, how does Judas die?
For example, how did Judas die? Here, he threw the pieces of silver down. In Acts, he bought land with it. So which one is it?
Matthew's gospel account just tells us he hanged himself. Hanging doesn't even necessarily necessitate that someone died, just for the record. And Luke talks about in Acts how he fell headlong and the insides burst out. You're commonly going to hear something along the lines of Judas most likely hanged himself and his body rotted away, and then ultimately he fell and his insides burst open. And one of the things he tried to say was, in Matthew's gospel account, he threw the money to the ground. In Acts, it talks about how he bought a field, and he says both of them can't be true. Judas ultimately was fulfilling a prophecy. So the prophet Zechariah, as you can see here, it talks about how his price was weighed at 30 pieces of silver. And then what does it say next? This is really vital. And then it says, and the Lord said unto me, cast it unto the potter. Right, so he gives the money to the potter, and where does he do this? It talks about how he gave the 30 pieces of silver in the house of the Lord. So in Zechariah, he's basically conflating both situations. He takes the money and he gives it to the potter in the house of the Lord. In the New Testament, Judas comes with his money, throws it down in the temple, and in the temple, the religious leaders decide we are going to buy a field. So when you have the insight from Zechariah, it's quite clear how the New Testament is ultimately writing this out. It was Judas's money who paid for the field, but the religious leaders were the ones that bought the field. The next example he went to present a contradiction was with a man by the name of Ahaziah. And he said in one place he's mentioned as 22 years old. In another place he's mentioned as 42 years old at the same time.
So let's go more. Ahaziah was 22 years old when he became king, and he reigned 1 year in Jerusalem. How old was he?
There are different opinions about how you can actually resolve this equation without it actually being a contradiction. But even if any of those opinions and views don't even work, the common view is generally that it was a scribal error. That is why when we think back to what we talked about earlier in today's video about Mark's gospel account, the fact we have so many manuscripts actually works in our favor, because we can see where someone may have made a mistake or miswrote something. the more manuscripts we have, the better it actually is for us. And there's other manuscripts based on other languages as well, which talk about how he was the same age in both places. The next example he brought up was a question he raised about the number of an army in the nation of Israel. In one place it says one number, in another place it says a different number.
So we went from 800,000 to 1,100,000, and we went from 500,000 to 470. Is that another contradiction?
Now, what I would recommend you do, as always, is go and check all of these things I'm talking about yourself and see who's actually right. Because as you search for these kind of things, it actually makes one scratch their head and wonder why he hasn't looked a bit deeper into finding these answers. Like I just brought up in the previous example, even if those examples, which are more than sufficient, are not satisfied, you could just look at this and say, as some people do, that this was a scribal error. And again, going back to the point that we have multiple manuscripts for Old Testament and New Testament, right? But obviously the further we go in history, the less likely we're going to have artifacts. But we do have different translations of the Old Testament which help us see, just like we can do with the New Testament as well. The main thing he spent most of this 2-hour conversation on, we'll get to it in a moment, don't worry. But he did spend a decent amount of time speaking about the Trinity. Now, I'm not going to speak about that in today's video because really and truly, as much as he bloviated and said, look, this and this and this about why the Trinity isn't wrong, we can sum up everything he says by this clip I'm going to show you, which basically answers the question.
Because for me, that's not becoming of God.
So are you saying that that is not possible?
No. Again, when you say possible, Allah ala kulli shay'in qadir.
No, I'm
right?
asking, can someone without a father be born?
Let me explain it. Okay. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala can do anything.
You see, as much as a Muslim, for example, doesn't like or cannot accept the view or the belief of the Trinity that Christians hold to, the only thing it really reduces to in the end is, I don't think that makes sense and I don't like it. That's not for me.
So to us, that idea that God, the creator of the universe, would be having to defecate in any form, to us is unacceptable. Right? Right. To me, I'm just talking about me.
Well, when it comes to the supernatural, it's not about what we like. It's about what's actually been revealed. This is how we now can examine whose religion is actually true. And if we can determine which religion is actually true, the doctrine and the belief of that particular religion will stand, not how we feel about it. So anytime a Muslim asks you or tries to bring up the Trinity, you can simply just say to them, are you saying that God could not do this? And the moment they say no, they're not saying that. That's really the end of the conversation. He spent most of his conversation with this Roman Catholic man going back and forth and debating about the two family trees in the gospel accounts in regards to Jesus. He asks, who is the father of Joseph?
Who's the father of Joseph?
He goes on to say that Matthew's gospel account talks about how Joseph is the son of a man named Jacob, and in Luke's gospel account it says Joseph is the son of a man named Heli.
It says Jesus himself began his ministry at about 30 years of age, being the supposed, which is in parentheses, son of Joseph, son of Heli. So who's the father, Jacob or Heli?
The main view is, like this Roman Catholic man actually told him, was that most people view Matthew's gospel account as dealing with Joseph's actual lineage, and Luke's gospel account, we believe, is dealing with Mary's lineage, Mary's family tree. I'm pretty certain that the Muslim Shaykh understood this, but because there was like a breakdown in their communication, it seemed like they couldn't get to where he ultimately wanted to go. But one question he did present was, if they are two different genealogies, how can it say that Joseph was begotten? How can it say begotten in both family trees?
One is using the genealogy of Mary, and one is using the genealogy of Joseph.
So when you when you say begotten, how could that be for Mary?
Now the problem with this is that's actually a mistake, because as you can see here in Matthew's gospel account, as we scroll down through all of these different names, you'll see that each line talks about begat, begat. It talks about begat, 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 right? And this goes all the way down till we get to Joseph, who was begotten by a man named Jacob. That is why most Christians look at Matthew's gospel account and say, yes, this is clearly talking about Joseph's ancestry, his family tree. Because when we get to Luke's gospel account, right, as you can see here, Luke doesn't use the Greek word, right? Geneo, or any form of that particular Greek word. He doesn't say begat. Notice it just says of. It says of, right? He uses a different word. And even when we speak at the start of this particular family tree, he talks about Jesus being the son of, as was supposed, right? The Greek word there is huios, right? For son. Obviously, when you think about it from that perspective, there's no issue as the Muslim Shaykh tried to present, because both genealogies do not say begotten. One does, which is Joseph's. The other, which is Luke's, doesn't say begotten. It just talks about the son of, the son of, the son of. Now, one of the reasons we believe this is Mary's family tree is because we've got Matthew's family tree already, which is different, number one. Number two, this family tree goes all the way back down to Adam. So as you scroll down this family tree and we get to the bottom of the passage, it goes all the way back down to Adam, right? Which seems to suggest a biological family tree here. But the Muslim Shaykh Uthman Farooq, his whole issue now is, right, is okay, if this is Mary's lineage, then this means that, as we can see here, that Heli, this guy here, would be Mary's father. Now, that is a logical conclusion. We would obviously have to infer, yes, we would agree to that. What Uthman Farooq is basically going to try and get you to believe is, how can this be Mary's family tree if it's talking about Heli, Joseph being the son of Heli? We need to go to a couple of passages from the Old Testament, and I'll show you how this answers today's question really easily. When you go to the Old Testament, there's a book in the Old Testament called Ezra. As you can see here, it's talking about these children, which were children of the priests. And notice what it says. It says the children of Habeah, the children of Koz, the children of Barzillai, right? But notice what it says next, which is really significant in regards to this family tree with Mary. It talks about how, which took a wife of the daughters of Barzillai, the Gileadite, and was called after their name. So what is this particular passage saying here? There were these children of the priests, right, who were named after a man named Barzillai, right? But how would they come under the name of Barzillai? It tells you, because they took a wife of the daughters of this man named Barzillai, and then they were now under Barzillai's name. So a man marries a woman, and he is now named under the father of the daughter. I want to give you another example, so you've got at least two witnesses corroborating what we're talking about here. This is from 1 Chronicles chapter 2, and I want you to notice what it says here. It's talking about the sons of a man named Apaim, and it says his sons were Ishi, and the sons of Ishi were a man named Shishan. And notice what it says. It says the children of Shishan were Ahle. Now notice it said here that this particular man Shishan had a son named Ahle, right? But as we go down to verse 34, what does it say? Now Shishan had no sons. So how can this man Shishan have a child, but at the same time it say he has no sons? Well, let's keep reading. Notice what it says next. Let me just scroll this up so you can see this even better. We can scroll up to verse 34, and what does it say? Shishan had no sons, but he had daughters. And what did Shishan do with one of his daughters? And Shishan had a servant, an Egyptian, whose name was Jarha. So Shishan gave his daughter to Jarha, his servant, to wife, and she bare him Ate. So notice, Shishan has no children, but he has daughters. So Shishan now gives one of his daughters to wife to one of his servants, a man named Jarha. Then Jarha and one of his daughters have a child called Attai. This is all in the guise of a family tree. If you read through 1 Chronicles 2, it's giving a family tree. Notice how the family tree continues. And Attai, right, who was not Shishan's son, technically was his daughter's son, begat Nathan, and it goes on and on and on as you read down. So Jarha had a child, and his son, right, was taken under the family tree of the woman's dad, not Jarha's. Knowing this, going back to passages like what we can see in Luke 3 verse 23, when it's talking about Joseph being of Heli, it's not talking about begotten like we talked about already, but it's showcasing, based on examples in the Old Testament, how a woman can carry on a father's lineage. Now bear in mind, this is one of the most popular Muslim apologists online, and these are some of the best arguments he's trying to present on a day-to-day to a layperson. But you just saw in today's video how we could look at every argument he brought up and deal with them more than sufficiently. He accused this Roman Catholic man of lying at different points in the whole conversation. And this isn't the first time he's accused someone who's defending the Bible as a liar. Just like he did in this particular situation. And look at what happened in that video.